Super. Got it. Okay, super. Thanks very much. And hang on, is that bar coming up in your view? Yeah, it's gone now. So, hi everybody. Hello. As Alex said, thanks Alex for introducing me. My name's Amelia Harker, and I work with English Language for Widening Participation. I am a EAP Senior Teaching Fellow, and I'm not a psychologist. So even though I do come from a psychology and sociology background, I'm approaching this very much as a teaching practitioner and not as somebody who's really trained in accessing anybody's trauma. So it's really about creating environments and having awareness, I suppose, is that whole is the ethos of trauma-informed practice when it comes to working with students and supporting staff too. So we'll talk a little bit, I'll introduce what widening participation is within this context, talk about refugee and asylum seeking students or people with displaced backgrounds, talk about our status as University of Sanctuary, and then trauma-informed pedagogy for students, trauma-informed practice for staff, the creation of psychologically informed environments, student, staff and institutional support, and formal and informal approaches. Now, I've got 20 minutes to talk to you, so I'm going to really just fly over some of the themes, and then at the end of the slides, there are resources and references, and I'll refer you, if you're all EAP practitioners as well, refer you to Alex's papers, which really were a catalyst in me setting up some of this work at Edinburgh. So obviously at Edinburgh we've got the School of Psychology who do a lot of research around this. We also have a multi-faith chaplaincy which are brilliant, and they do a lot of staff and student support as well, and they are trained counsellors and have a listening service, etc. But I was really interested in this because of the role of English Language for Widening Participation, which deals with students from non-traditional backgrounds, aspire to get in, and the barriers around that. Once people are in, how do we support them with literacies, and how do we create classroom spaces which are inclusive and aware, and then also the attributes for progression after graduation. So things such as resilience as a graduate attribute as well, and fostering this in everything that we do. And I think it really is it's a mindset. So to be sort of trauma informed, there's practical strategies, but there's also just a mindset and a culture which all the kind of strategies and policies sort of fit within. And within widening participation, this idea of relentless welcome, that we're, even though we're a high achieving institution, that we want to be, that we get the best from people, basically, when people are comfortable and when they feel safe and secure, when they feel that they can ask questions and that they're really involved in part of the community. And so creating a relentless welcome gets the best from students as well, and it really gets the best from teachers too if you feel safe and supported within your working environment. Recently, I have a colleague called Alison Phipps. She's over in Glasgow, and you may know her, and she's the UNESCO Chair for Languages and the Arts, and she wrote a paper, an article in the National, talking about it's hard to comprehend the life of her friend in Gaza. And it was a really beautiful piece, because Alison's got a knack of just deeply humanizing people, and the way that she writes about her students and her colleagues with this idea of just we're dealing with human beings, we're dealing with people, we are human beings ourselves, we're full of emotion, we're full of history, we have all of this biography that we take into our teaching spaces. And so the piece her friend in Gaza said about living on hope, and I think we all have it it's very present in our mind what students are going through if we're focusing specifically on displaced people as well. And of course, people can be displaced for a variety of reasons that I'll let you go into the literature to find out more about that. But with the work that inspired trauma-informed practice, for me, it was definitely to do with displaced people and refugee background students as part of a widening participation inclusive approach. So the sunshine will rise, higher education and dignity and hope, and preparing for the future. So as teachers and as staff, we're helping that development work really. And hope seems to be an element of that kind of post-traumatic growth when you are ready to learn, but also throughout that process, that hopeful process, it's messy. You know, humans are messy, our relationships, our lives, the conflict zones that people are operating within, it's horrendously complicated and messy. And there's no way out of that other than to be compassionate and aware and know that the barriers that students are facing, or that staff and at-risk scholars are facing too, is messy and complex, and we just kind of have to be there for each other throughout these very difficult or potentially very difficult times. The need for language as language teachers in EAP, you know, this diet of words that academic language can be abstracted, and we're looking at it quite institutionally or instrumentally, but actually when we're connecting with students and learners, it's so that they can get on in their life, the art of living. And so if we take in Freire's ideas of, you know, teaching as you know, the pedagogy of the oppressed, and love for our students so that they can feel comfortable within environments so that they can operate, and also for our colleagues and our staffs and for ourselves too, that self-compassion that's important for resilient ongoing work when you're doing development work or humanitarian work as a teacher, if you identify as such. And I think the spaces that I'm working at the moment, it definitely feels very much like development and humanitarian work, to be honest. And how do you function? How do you cope? How do you get on with that over a long time as well, so that you don't have compassion fatigue? The terminology, displaced persons, refugee background people, at-risk scholars, etc. Martha, who I know over, she used to work at the Scottish Refugee Council. She's a consultant now. She does excellent training actually in refugee scholar support too. Let's just call them people, just folk trying to get on. And we're all just trying to work together to create a culture where we can do that in a positive way and combat you know, climates of hostility. As a University of Sanctuary, Edinburgh very much is, and we want to embed that in all that we do and raise awareness about what it means to be a University of Sanctuary, taking a positive approach for safety and inclusion, and then sharing what we do with other people. And I'm not going to present Edinburgh as a kind of model of perfect practice. We're very much in the process of trying to do the best that we can, but also there's a long way to go. And I think with institutional support, it's if we've got kind of policymakers or managers in the group, it's a duty as well to be creating this institutionally. It's not just an individual responsibility to be a nice person to their colleagues or to be aware of the issues that might be affecting students in their learning. It's an institutional responsibility. So, trauma-informed practice. Alex, I direct you to Alex's papers actually for EAP, trauma-informed practice in EAP teaching specifically, and her references at the end, and you can go into that. But it's about teachers being at the front line of coping with the outcomes of displacement, and the fact that if we've got displaced people in our classes, there's a very high chance that they have suffered from post-traumatic stress and interpersonal violence, which to be admitted as an asylum seeker you would have experienced. And then that presents all sorts of barriers for learning. We'll touch on those later, but as I said, I don't want to go so much into the pedagogy because I feel like that's a whole other training area, but we'll focus on the blog and institutions. With last year, and I don't know if you've managed to read the blog before attending, but 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine and Homes for Ukraine, Scotland opening up, and we had 100 people arriving per day in the airport, and there was a very quick mobilization. Before that, when we were kind of seeing things unfold, and we also had the Afghan resettlement program in Scotland and the Syria resettlement program. There's refugees and refugee background people coming from all over the world, Eritrea. You know, there's just so many people who are attending our universities. We have the MasterCard Foundation program with people that have been displaced from in Africa, and there's an increasing number of people that we're admitting to the university who we know are at-risk scholars. So in anticipation from this, and knowing my team and the fact that they would have an increasing number of people in their classes, I posted Alex's articles, and then people started commenting, yes, I've had this experience, or yes, this happened and I didn't know what to do. We also work with the Council for At-Risk Academics, so Cara, I don't know if you know Cara, and the Syrian academics that are there, and what has been disclosed to us over the years and how much we're actually holding with that information. You also want to be up to date, so you're reading the news. I'm sure a lot of you are kind of following the news quite closely, and the impact that has on you as well. So trying to be positive and future focused and hopeful, but also the very real pain that's included in that, that we don't really shut off from or switch off from necessarily as soon as we leave work. Key principles of being trauma informed are creating areas that are safe, where there's trust, where there's choice, collaboration, empowerment, and that are culturally considerate. There's trauma informed toolkits, which have been written about this. A lot of them are focused on NHS workers dealing with trauma, or so NHS, there's a lot of literature as well for supporting staff that are working within the military, but for teachers there is, but Alex had picked up on a gap for EAP there, and I think this is potentially a further one as well for institutional support within EAP context too. For the learners, and I would go so far as, for the staff too, the interference with learning, or for staff, the interference with engagement sometimes if you're preoccupied, fearful of taking risks, if you don't feel like you're working within a safe environment, or speaking out potentially, avoidance, to be late or to feel that you don't want to go in, trust or being withdrawn. Students sometimes maybe don't want to be talking in classes with people that they don't trust if they've come from a difficult environment. But then also for teachers, think, who can you trust to talk about issues depending on the political culture that you're working within. Difficulties working in groups, restless or irritable, panic attacks potentially for people that have experienced that, interpersonal violence, flashbacks and anger and despair. And there's quite a lot written about this, but again, within educational context, that institutional support. But when we're dealing with our students and with each other, as I mentioned, we're not therapists, and trauma-informed practice is very much, and I'd like to stress this, very much about not accessing or deliberately trying to access anybody's trauma in any way. That's not our role. It's about being aware that trauma exists and how it can manifest with as a barrier to learning, or a barrier to interpersonal relationships, or a barrier within ourselves, within how we feel about the work that we're doing. So sometimes trauma sometimes it's been confused as actually, and that's more kind of critical literacies where people are accessing through classroom spaces, personal experiences, etc. And that's perilous, basically, in how to avoid potentially perilous pedagogies. So just to stress that that's not the intention with trauma-informed pedagogy or practice, but asking how somebody is and being caring and inquiring about biography in terms of, like, how are you? What does this mean to you? I mean, that you're not really being a therapist when you're doing that, but you're being human. So it's an awareness of knowing it's okay to ask people how they are, or what's been going on with them, and holding that for them if they do disclose something, but you're not necessarily intentionally trying to do that in order to access trauma in any way. And being informed about it is not the same as directly teaching it. However, if you think about it, if somebody, and I had a few examples of this recently, with some colleagues, and when they did disclose things to me, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that we've got that relationship where they didn't feel like they had to suppress or repress what was going on, that they had that freedom basically to say, actually, this is how I'm feeling in it, and it is quite difficult. So as professionals and as colleagues, how do we hold that for our staff too? And as supervisors, if you're line managing people and you're giving training in this, or you're having catch-ups, how do you have those catch-ups, and how do you hold what's disclosed? So what's our role as EAP practitioners? Advocation for inclusion, as Alex talks about, being an enlightened waiter, so being in service to our students, and now to extend that to our staff too, and being part of a community of practice. Communities of practice, I think, are really important, because then we can have this shared language, even just having the language of being trauma-informed or trauma-aware, and then knowing what that might be and how that impacts people. Then just you give it a word and it's easier to sort of interact with intellectually. Also, this has EDI implications. So failure to provide integrated and ongoing support. It's an equality, diversity and inclusion area too, and mental health support for staff. So psychologically informed environments. When I posted those articles, and then there was a discussion, and then from the back of that, we set up classes. I was part of an ESOL provider forum, trying to map the landscape of ESOL in Edinburgh. What could we do as a university in response to conflict, and how could we help? People are saying we need more language classes, we need more signposting, etc. So set up classes. We were in a position that summer actually where we could reallocate, redeploy teaching fellows to put together. And we taught over nearly 400 students that summer. And then with the teachers, they were newly coming in. They had been newly traumatized, they newly fled. And that's quite a lot for staff. So giving training initially, having the materials being trauma informed, and then having regular checkups with staff, because it was quite stressful. And these were experienced staff. They were motivated to do the work. They'd requested to do the work, but still, how do you look after people, and how do you do that when time and resources can be quite short? Long term, those classes from summer drop-ins turned into embedded year-round short courses, and now we offer a general English short course that's free to displaced people who have settled in Edinburgh, and that's got a pathway as well for EAP for university study and potentially for scholarships too. So we're trying to link things up and connect them, and then think, okay, how do we do this long term? That was a response, an emergency response, but really we need to be doing this and embedding it and doing it well. So formal institutional policies, access to training, and the impact of culture and the centrality of compassion and community. I was chatting with my boss, who I really respect, and actually the heads of school and the heads of departments are very fortunate to be working within a culture where people are proactive about mental health support. And I appreciated a comment that I got back as well, where it was like, contracts are important for this. Staff feeling like they're on a contract where they do have access to training and they do have an impact, a community of practice. And I feel like I'd like to kind of wave a bit of a flag for the type of contracts that staff and institutional and hiring as well, hiring practices for embodying and hiring a workforce that embodies the value of trauma, but also that encourages CPD and communication and relationships, etc. Building awareness about a trauma-informed approach so that staff feel a little bit better prepared for if they do have that student who discloses or reacts. Supporting a culture of staff wellness when you're sending emails out of hours, or if you're really quite obsessed with something and actually you maybe need to take a break, having that reminder that's not you need to take a break, but rather this is really important work. However, are you able to set boundaries around it, and what are you able to do to look after yourself, and what opportunities can we give you in terms of time and support to be looking after yourself, so that you can do so that this is a long-term process, so that we're not just doing responsive work, but we're in it for the long haul. And how do we create safe physical, social and environmental, emotionally environmental spaces. And again, it comes down to awareness, training, community, etc. Staff care. Staff can experience vicarious or secondary trauma. If you were a therapist, you'd have a supervisor to have check-ins with, who would then you could debrief with. But as teachers, how do we do debriefing sessions? What about if you're working within a culture where people don't want to talk about things? Maybe people don't. Maybe they're being okay. You know, maybe they can hold it for a while, but having the opportunity so that if it does get to a point where they do want to have a conversation. And the principal of Edinburgh University said once in a lecture, which always stuck with me, is like, the best piece of technology we've got in Edinburgh is in the staff room, it's the kettle. And, you know, just that idea of, and I really liked it with all the AI and all the whatnot that we've got going on, that he appreciated the value of a kettle for bringing people together. Supervision and mentoring, embedding catch-ups and mentors. So training at the beginning, catch-ups throughout, debriefing at the end. If nothing's happened, fine, but if it has, it's okay to talk about it. Boundaries, what is your role? And this for me definitely is a bit of an issue, because I work with third sector. I do a lot of outreach work with the third sector as well, and it's work that I'm impassioned about. So where are the boundaries of the line between what's voluntary and what's work? And where am I best positioned for impact is something to reflect on. And having colleagues and managers and supervisors as well who can recognise when it is important to do the voluntary work, but when it's also important to just remind you, like, not in a dictatorial way, but just actually what's the role. Signposting to support. The trouble with a lot of mental health training is sometimes being too overwhelmed to attend. But when you're creating cultures, it's just those little reminders and workload allocations, etc. And then compassion fatigue. The container needs containing. I don't know if you've ever had things spill out and spill over into vicarious trauma, and that idea of holding or containing for other people. But then what are you doing as a practitioner to be contained? And if you're a manager or supervisor, what's your institution doing to help contain others? Cultures of resilience for our students as graduate attributes, but also for ourselves. And there is quite a lot of training available, but how do you prioritise it? And if you prioritise CPD in investment in staff are valued and committed, professionalised. Resilience and solidarity. This is for the long term. So this student, she was shortlisted for the portrait award at the Edinburgh Portrait Gallery, and this is up in the School of Psychology now in the entrance, and it's about the culmination of pain and resistance and hope for her country to recover. And in the longer piece, she talks about education within that, and how as a student, but also as a professional going forward, the kind of value of being supported in order to be resilient. A little poem, I don't know if you've ever heard this, when we're talking about, you know, difficult and messy situations. I like this, that there's no such thing as a safe space. Like, the world isn't safe. Our classrooms, we can try and make them as safe as possible. We can try and make our work environments as safe as possible. But the reality of it is, we exist in the real world, and we carry scars, we cause wounds, we're not perfect. We can try through education to be as hopeful as possible and have that, that kind of emancipatory, psychologically emancipatory attitude and amplify voices. But, you know, we don't always do things right. When I reflect back to the sanctuary drop-in classes, were they really environmentally safe? You know, people coming and not knowing each other. Was it too soon? Was it good because it gave people a base where they could kind of touch base and have information about the city? Was it good for those people who had that kind of fight, you know, the fight or flight, but they were in that fight mode where they had somewhere to go and something to do? But were they really calm? You know, were they perfect? No. Am I glad we did them? Yes. And we'll try and work on it side by side as these communities, and I hope that's what RefugEAP it is facilitating. So widening participation, access and support, at-risk scholar support, there's loads there to read about in your own time. Universities of sanctuary, and the fact that it's got pedagogical implications for practice in classrooms, but also it's much broader than that for outside within the structures, and then the formal informal approaches, policies, but also asking how you doing. Okay, if anybody has any questions or comments, well, I think we're going to go into breakouts just now. I've put a load of resources there, and then you can do some of the reading if you're keen. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Amelia. You've given us so much to think about. I think one of the things that really struck me was the fact that you talk about how institutions have this responsibility to embed different systems and working practices. And that it's not just down to saying to people, go away and do some self-care, which tends to be what quite a few of our institutions tend to do. They kind of push it back onto us. Whereas actually they need to embed these practices in a meaningful way themselves. Amelia, if you're happy for us to share these slides with the attendees, that would be brilliant, because there were so many useful links and things that I'm sure people would like to go back and look at later.
Okay, yeah, for sure. And just to say, and that's a whistle-stop tour as well. So yeah, it's probably worthwhile going back and having a look at some of the resources there. And I think that there's work to do as well. You know, there's research opportunities here too.
Yeah, a lot. There's a lot more work to do in this area. Before we go any further, I'm just going to stop the recording.